Everyone could please find a seat, we'll get started. Good evening and welcome to the Paso Robles Joint Unified School District Office. I am Dr. Kurt DeBose, District Superintendent. We are very pleased to host this important event this evening. Free, fair elections with informed voters is the very foundation of our democracy. As we ponder how important that right to vote is and all of our other freedoms, I'd invite all to take just a moment to recognize the Ukrainians fighting to preserve those rights we all too often in our country take for granted. If we'd have just a moment to think about what's going on right now in the Ukraine. Thank you. I'd now like to introduce Mary Lee Hyman, tonight's facilitator from the League of Women Voters. Mary Lee. John Lamb, event organizer representing Indivisible San Luis Obispo. John. C.R. Lara, president, Hispanic Outreach Council. C.R. over here. Reverend Steve Vines, president, San Luis Obispo County NAACP. Steve. I'd also like to thank District IT Director Scott Buller and his crew for their assistance this evening. Thank you, Scott. Our moderators this evening are Paso Robles Mayor Steve Martin. I'd say the Honorable Steve Martin, but we're friends and it sounds too odd to say that. Our other moderator is Ed Cabrera of the League of Women Voters, who will take over in just a moment. I'd also like to recognize Paso Robles High School Leadership Advisor Jenny Martinez, one of my former students from Templeton High School, more decades ago than we'd like to admit, both of us. And our student hosts tonight include Kalani Gaviola, host for Don Addis. Thank you, Kalani. Mel Gonzalez, host for Zoe Carter. Tiffany Robles and Reese Hartley, co-host for John Drake. Brandon Nguyen, host for Vicki Norden. And Israel Perez, host for John Wizard. With that, I will turn it over to Ed Cabrera. I would like you to remember to please mute your phones, and this is a live broadcast. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. DeBose. On behalf of all the volunteers representing the League of Women Voters of San Luis Obispo County, we welcome you to tonight's forum. We are aware that we are pressed for time tonight. Therefore, we will be strict about the time limits on the candidates' responses. We may have to interrupt them in mid-sentence if need be to stay on schedule. We apologize in advance. Helping us with the important task of timekeeping is our volunteer, Ann Quinn. She will be seated so that the candidates may easily see her when she raises her paddles to tell them when they have 1 minute left on their time, then 30 seconds, then finally when they must stop because their time has expired. We ask that the audience realize that any reaction, even positive, to a candidate's remarks may be disruptive and may distract them from using their time effectively. So please refrain from any interruption. The candidates will be responding in alphabetical order and in rotation. Ms. Addis will be the first to give her opening statement, followed by Ms. Carter, and so on. Ms. Carter will therefore begin the next rotation. Opening statements will be limited to 2 minutes. Answers will be limited to 1.5 minutes for topics 1 through 4. The last topic's response shall be limited to only 1 minute. There will be no closing statements. We will be covering 5 topics tonight. Each topic will feature 2 questions each. Members of our live audience and those joining us online will be given the opportunity to offer the second question for the last 4 topics. Our volunteers will circulate amongst the audience to make available a list of the topics and single cards that audience members can use to write their questions. Please, only 1 question per card. Our viewers online may use the chat function on Zoom to ask their question. Only volunteers will be able to view your questions. Volunteer sorters will then Pick one question per topic from our combined audiences. Care will be taken to choose a question that involves a subject area not already discussed. Sorters will also be eliminating any question that does not address an issue under the jurisdiction of the California Assembly. Finally, I would like to thank a group of young volunteers from Paso Robles High School who are assisting us with this forum. We trust that the candidates and our audience members will properly model for them the type of behavior and cooperation that representative democracy requires. To begin the first round, I now surrender the lectern to the mayor of Paso Robles. I can say, His Honor, Mr. Steve Martin.
Thank you very much. I want to thank the folks that have put this together for allowing me to co-moderate. It is a pleasure and an honor. I want to thank the candidates for throwing their hats in the ring, because that is a service and, quite frankly, a courageous one, and welcome you to the proceedings. And I want to thank the people in our audience here and virtual for being involved in what is truly an American process and preparing yourself to participate in and exercise your franchise as an American voter. With that, we're going to begin our opening statements now. Our timer is ready to go. Each opening statement will be 2 minutes long. We'll be watching you like eagles. So we'll start now by opening the floor to Dawn Addis.
No pressure. Well, it's good to see all of you. Bienvenido, buenas tardes, welcome. It's so glad to see all of you. I want to say thank you to the League of Women Voters, to NAACP, to Indivisible, to the Latino Outreach Council, and to Women's March San Luis Obispo for sponsoring this event. And I want to say thank you to my colleagues up here on the dais for running. It does take bravery. And to the dignitaries in the room, I know there's more than just Mayor Martin, but I want to say a special thank you to Mayor Martin for hosting and being part of this event. And to you in the audience and on Zoom, I want to say thank you for taking your time this evening, because democracy takes time and it takes effort. And so a special thank you to the families and the students of Paso Robles who have been champions in fighting for voting rights, for educational rights, and for true representation. I am running to champion the issues that I've heard from many of you across my visits to living rooms, to community halls, to churches, and to Get Out the Vote rallies. And these are the issues of housing, of healthcare, of climate action, of equity and economic recovery, and so much more. Because we need multi-solutions in California. We live multi-issue lives. And I'm also running because I believe in each of you and in the strength that we create when we work together in unity across our differences. I've seen us do this from the Women's March to the inception of Indivisible to the new and resurgent groups across 80/30 who are working for change. We are truly the ones that we've been waiting for in 2022. And to every voter from San Luis Obispo, Monterey, and Santa Cruz counties, you have my promise to do what I have always done, to listen, to work hard, and to champion your needs in our state legislature.
That is 2 minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you for your statement. We move on now to candidate Zoe Carter.
Thank you for having me here tonight. I think this is the first time we've all been together in person, and it's really great to see everybody's faces and see all you here, and thank you to everybody who helped organize this event. I'm extremely excited to be in Paso. My name is Zoe Carter, and I am, as you know, a candidate in the 30th Assembly District. I come here from Monterey, and I come to be someone who can work with everybody. Work with different voices, different points of view. We may not always agree, but I do believe that part of democracy is not agreeing and bringing everybody together. I grew up in Santa Barbara County and went to school in Monterey, bounced around and came back to Monterey almost 8 years ago. So this is really my home. The Central Coast is where I've lived most of my life, and I really appreciate the opportunity to represent you all. I think that some of the major issues facing us are homelessness, housing, climate change, and we need to really work together to come up with creative solutions. And I promise to be a fighter for you all in the Assembly and work with you all to come up with solutions for our communities. And I've heard many interesting points of view. And I think, we need to also address our mental health crisis that's going on. and support our first responders and support everybody in our community. So I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Mr. John Drake.
Hey everyone, my name is John Drake and I'm running for California State Assembly District 30. First, I want to say thank you for allowing me to be here and allowing me to speak as a young person here. I'm so honored for that. So a little bit about myself. I am LGBT, an immigrant, and the housing policy director of an unhoused people's nonprofit I founded in Lancaster, Los Angeles, to help solve the homeless issue that the government out there failed and is continuing to fail on doing. As I'm a public policy student at Cal Poly's accelerated academic program, I'm involved in many student clubs and activities on campus. I am also a student on the, I'm also the student advisory counselor for, to the dean, as well as an online resources officer for the university's Cal Poly of Liberal Arts College. I'm the youngest person on this panel, but I can assure you that I will fight for you and be an active voice for the youth and for our minority communities here along the Central Coast. And again, thank you so much for allowing me to be here and express our concerns as members and young people living in the Central Coast communities.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Next, we have candidate Vicki Norden.
Just going to make sure I'm on. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great, thank you. First of all, I want to say thank you to the League of Women Voters for all the work that you put together to get us here on this platform. And I want to especially say thank you to John Lamb. I told him I have a whole file for him. He did a lot of organizing and mobilizing to get every one of us here. And I also want to thank every one of you for coming out tonight. I want to say thank you to those who are on Zoom. My name is Vicki Norden, and as you know, I'm running as a candidate in Assembly District 30. And most people say, well, why are you running? Why did you decide to run? And the reason I'm running is because I see that our government in the legislature in Sacramento is out of control. It's going in the wrong direction. It's a one-party structure, and it's not benefiting any and all of us. So I believe that I can make a difference. I'm running because I can make a difference. I'm a common sense lady. I'm able to, 1 minute left. I'm a common sense, caring, no nonsense girl, and when it comes to accomplishing goals with a great sense of humor, I might add, I'm able to do that. I'm also concerned, along with the millions of Californians across the district, about the direction our state is headed, and quite frankly, as I mentioned, the imbalance of power of the one-party rule in our government. When one party rules, they think they have no checks and balance, that they can pass bills they want, make agenda-driven policies, and it hurts all of us and our future generations and our children. Democracy ends when there's no only one-party rule. 13,000 businesses voted with their feet when they left the Golden State. They left for better opportunities and better jobs in housing and education, and they took their employees with them. My motto is, it's time to take the label off of politics and vote for the best candidate. I'm Vicki Norden. I'm a businesswoman, a nonprofit director, an educator, and a community servant. I'm also a mother of 3, and I have 7 grandchildren.
That's
Thank you.
2 minutes. Thank you very much for your opening statement. Next, we move to John Wizard.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to the hosts and the guests and the students especially. I appreciate the warm welcome that you have given us here, and it is nice to be in person with everybody. So I thought I would just share quickly a little bit of my background. I started in public safety when I was younger. I was a firefighter up in Pacific Grove and a police officer here in San Luis Obispo, and Los Osos resident for a short time before meeting my fiance and moving back to the Monterey Bay area, where I was a deputy sheriff. And save for some surgeries and some injuries to my knees, I would likely still be doing that work, but it turns out that that was not what it was meant to be. And so I pivoted into public policy because I was still interested in serving my community. So I found myself on the Monterey County Planning Commission, working on issues like oil wells and hydraulic fracking in South Monterey County, on cannabis issues in the Salinas Corridor, and on water issues in North Monterey County before getting elected to the Seaside City Council, where I serve today. Professionally, after those injuries and leaving public safety, I went to go work for Habitat for Humanity in Santa Cruz County, building some homes in Live Oak, and now I work in statewide housing policy, reviewing and commenting on and helping improve housing elements, which are long-range planning documents for homes across cities and counties. So some of the things that I would love to work on and engage in a dialogue and bring forward in the state legislature would be, of course, housing. We see whether it's folks that are living in overcrowded situations or people who live outside or people who just cannot afford a down payment to buy a home, housing is a critical issue in our state. But you can't talk about housing without talking about water, and here in Paso especially, but also on the Monterey Peninsula and even in Santa Cruz County. Water issues abound, and we need to talk about conservation, capturing rainwater, stormwater, ag wash, those sorts of things, injecting and cleaning them so that we can get that beneficial water to expand our residential and economic ability throughout our communities. And last, my father-in-law lives by the Bixby Bridge, and we could talk about that later. Thank you.
And that's 2 minutes. Thank you, sir. As I can attest, having sat on that side of the microphone a couple of times, time flies when you're having fun or you're participating in a political forum. So we've warmed the candidates up. Hopefully you are warmed up also. And I'll like to turn back to Mr. Cabrera as we start our questions.
The subject of question number 1 is social equity. Our first question comes to us courtesy of Latino Outreach Council. The question, please share your definition of social equity in context of ethnic minorities in California, and what you would do in the Assembly to advance the cause of social equity. Ms. Carter.
I have to turn my mic back on. So for me, social equity has many different roles it plays in our state, and I think when we start talking about social equity, we have to talk about gender equity, and we have to talk about pay equity. We have to talk about all those things as well as ethnic equity. And if I am given the opportunity to go to the state capitol, I'm committed to working on all of those issues and making sure we have more fair representation and more social equity programs across our communities. I think we also need to make sure that there's equal pay, and that's a really important piece for me too. Thank you.
Mr. Drake.
So social equity to me means giving communities that have been historically disenfranchised opportunities that they were barred from doing in the past. That doesn't always mean ending up in the same place, but that means giving those communities an equal footing and an equal starting place so that they can eventually build the wealth and the security that communities who weren't disenfranchised already have. What that also means is that we reinvest our resources into educational infrastructure, commercial infrastructure. It means investing into political infrastructure to give them that ability to fight for the future that they otherwise have been barred from achieving.
Ms. Norden.
Thank you. I'd like to go back to our nation's founding documents, the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. I quote the preamble that says, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator in certain inalienable rights, that among them are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." I personally hold the premise that God gave us these inalienable rights, and we were created equal, not based on our skin color, where we were born, or who our parents are. California joined the Union following the war over territory with Mexico as the 31st state. I would also add that we came into the Union as a non-slave state in 1850. I don't know if you're aware of that. From our beginning as Californians, our forefathers chose not to be a slave state. So when we talk about social equity, our founding documents work to unite us. Through so many transitions, we'd had the opportunity to work out freedoms like slavery, a woman's right to vote, from equal pay to freedom of religion to get where we are today. And even our founding documents were written in English and Spanish. But I might add that we are still in progress. Our borders speak for themselves. People from many other countries and ethnic backgrounds want to come to this great nation. They wouldn't be coming if they didn't believe there was an opportunity to thrive and live here safely. As your elected representative, I will continue to advocate for equal opportunity for all people across my district. To me, it's not about party politics. That's the problem we're trying to fix today, and that's what's been dividing us, a one-party system, and that's not democracy.
Mr. Wizard.
Thank you again. Social equity is about ensuring that no person, regardless of race, creed, color, gender, any of those identifying characteristics, that no person has their opportunity and their future arbitrarily limited by way of law or society. that we don't put constraints on people just because they exist. And in order to ensure that that's the kind of government that we have, that people can thrive in our communities, we need to ensure that the laws support that kind of thing. And so in Sacramento, we need to talk about things like how we undo blockbusting and redlining and exclusionary zoning, how we undo things like the skyrocketing cost of education and how it's becoming less accessible to people. Certainly with homeownership as the gateway into the middle class, we need to talk about how so many people can no longer afford to buy a home. Healthcare and medical debt, people who live in medical and food deserts, and how we provide a society through law to ensure that no one's left behind. So things like baby bonds, things like down payment assistance, things like subsidized health clinics to make sure that nobody has to drive 3 hours to go see a general practitioner. Basic things that enhance and enrich our communities so that everybody, regardless of where they are and what they look like on the outside, is excluded. Thank you.
Ms. Addis.
Well, excuse me, I want to say thank you to the Latino Outreach Council for this question. It's actually something that I have dedicated my career, my community organizing, and my public service to. As a teacher, I've taught students with special needs, many of whom are ethnic minorities, and I currently serve immigrant and English learner students. I also co-coordinate my district's equity leadership team, and I co-authored our district equity roadmap. And social equity hinges on righting the wrongs of the past while uplifting the strengths of all of California's people, especially the strengths of ethnic minorities for whom too long they have been brushed aside. We have to eliminate the barriers while creating policies and funding that move Californians forward. And in the Assembly, I will champion a California where hard work actually does pay off. And that means passing laws and funding programs focused on supporting local business, increasing housing, making sure no one goes without health care, creating better air quality for outdoor workers, expanding access to higher education. Social equity is about creating the conditions where every Californian can succeed, especially for our ethnic minorities. It's what I've always fought for, and it's what I'll continue to do if elected.
The next question comes to us courtesy of the NAACP, San Luis Obispo, and shout out to them. They have a live recording of tonight's forum on their website. Their question: the repeal of California Prop 209 ended affirmative action in education and employment. If elected, how would you try to offset the negative effects this has had on these communities? Mr. Drake, you are first.
Well, for me, it's simply going back to what I stated earlier in that it's the reinvestment in our educational and into our educational and commercial programs into communities of color. For the most part, while Prop 9 allowed these communities and our marginalized groups to have better educational and commercial opportunities by being given a leg up, for the most part, what was severely lacking was that they didn't have educational infrastructure, which didn't allow them to initially get there in the first place. And part of fixing that is to reinvest into the educational systems so that they are given the resources that most communities, most majority white communities, have access to. And part of making that transition is to recognize that we have communities in this country, and especially in this state, that are being held down because they don't have the same access to resources. They just simply don't. And in order to ramify that, we have to invest. We have to keep investing until those injustices are ramified.
Ms. Norton.
Yes, thank you. I advocate for policies that do not discriminate based on gender, based on race, religion, or social status. We need to take the labels off. When we discriminate to promote one ethnicity over another, I believe it's discrimination. We just saw in San Francisco the recall of several school board members. The San Francisco Board of Education heavily focused on racial justice issues, without providing basic education needs for all of their students during the pandemic. And the parents said, enough. The focus was wrong. We know there's discrimination and it needs to stop. But what really needs to stop is using ethnicity based on the color of one's skin to give additional benefits. I support equal opportunity for all in education and in the workplace. And change begins in all of society when we choose to change the way that we think, the way that we apply ourselves, the way we set goals, and if we're willing to become the change we want to see. Not every applicant will get the job they applied for. Not every candidate on this platform will be elected to represent you as your assembly member. And not every college applicant will get their first college choice. But achieving one goal should not be based on ethnicity, but on qualifying. I agree with the civil rights leader Martin Luther King, and I quote, "I look to a day when people will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character." As your representative, I advocate for policies that do not discriminate based on gender, race.
Mr. Wizard.
Thank you, Mr. Cabrera. So Prop 209 created an entire generation of leaders who currently serve in a variety of roles throughout our communities, whether that is in elected office or as teachers or as community leaders in our nonprofit organizations. And when Prop 209 was defeated at the ballot, at the ballot box, it ended opportunities for people. And so we can't legislate our way around a ballot initiative. That is the whole point of a ballot initiative. But we can try to level the playing field differently. And so one of the ways that you can do that, we have seen with the CSUs and the UCs, instead of saying, let's give people extra points, the UC and the CSU are saying, let's reduce the barriers that let people through the door, such as getting rid of the SAT and the ACT. And so to specifically answer your question about what can we do instead, what we can do instead of creating alternate paths to get to that point of success, we can remove the restrictions, we can remove the barriers that have kept people out historically. Instead of giving people that leg up, the voters have told us we can't do that anymore. So the legislature can fix that by saying you don't have to do all of these steps, because with generational wealth and privilege comes greater success and opportunity that isn't afforded to everyone universally.
Ms. Addis.
Well, thank you for this question to the NAACP, and I'll start by saying that I am endorsed by the California Faculty Association, which is very social justice oriented and would want to work with them on this issue if elected. But as a K-12 teacher, I really believe in prevention as well as preparing students for what's to come next. I think that's our best strategy for offsetting the negative effects of losing Prop 209. We have to create the conditions where every student has equitable access and support, especially African American, Latino, and Indigenous students. And so I would champion two things. One is addressing advanced placement courses, which are sought by universities. These are courses like AP courses that need to be offered at every single high school at equal rates. They need to be culturally relevant, and the tests that students have to take to get the AP credit need to be free of cost. The second thing that I would do would be increase free high school-based college admissions counseling, because many students, especially middle class and upper class students, are paying thousands and thousands of dollars to get those services, and those without means cannot get counseling to get into college. So it creates an inequitable system at the K-12 level. So I think we have to work together across our K-12
Ms. Carter.
schools.
Thank you for this question. I think that the devastating effects that this has had on the African American and Latino and Indigenous communities is critical to overcoming. And part of working together on solving issues is removing barriers to access, working with students in the K-12 system to make sure they have the resources they need so that they can get to college, and helping the communities get access to college as well. I know that I was very lucky that I had the help to get there, but not everybody has those resources, and making sure that there are equitable access to CSU and UC in working with loans, and costs is a huge problem. And, you know, students coming out of college with an ungodly amount of loans is not an equitable way to approach education. And I know from having worked with the CSU on their statewide student association board that those are issues. And also textbooks. Textbooks are not affordable for students, and that's a huge issue as well. So how do we work towards making it more accessible and more open to more students, and not creating financial barriers, not creating testing barriers, and not creating a community that's exclusive, because it needs to be more inclusive? Thank you.
Thank you for those answers. Our second topic tonight centers on environmental protections. The first question will come from the San Lucia Sierra Club. The second question will come from you, our audience, the combined audience of the people physically in attendance tonight and those online. We have runners that are going to be picking up your questions and then selecting the one to be asked. They'll also be taking into consideration those people who are asking questions via chat online. So our first question on this topic comes from the San Lucia Sierra Club. The question is this: the Biden administration has stated that moving the Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary designation forward along with wind energy development in an adjacent area are, quote, important and complementary goals, end quote. Do you agree? First, Ms. Norton.
Well, as I've been listening, and all of you are listening out there and listening tonight, and I do appreciate that. And that's what I've been doing. I've been listening to the folks here in San Luis Obispo County. The community does not seem united on this at all, even though this issue has been around since about 2015. Your question begins with the support of the federal government, but I didn't hear any supportive names from local governments in your question. I support local control, and this is one example. Some people say that they're in favor of the marine sanctuary, and others are sharing opposition to the proposed wind energy development. There seems much concern about the unknown effects of the infrastructure noise and the vibration on marine animals. Some noted particularly migrating whales, and I would even add the birds. In addition, the fishermen are concerned about the effects of the local fishing industry. Residents are concerned about the wind farms off the coast. And I join the people in their concern about the wind farm as to how it will affect the ocean habitat and if it will produce the needed goals that we have targeted in California. I am in support of protecting our environment. However, this area that you're speaking about covers 140 miles of coastland from Cambria to Santa Barbara in a jurisdiction of 2 counties, and it would then be yielded to more federal control and not local control. Management of federal lands seems to be very disjointed, being spread across multiple departments and bureaus governed by myriad of overlapping and often conflicting laws, missions, and regulations, and
Mr.
not
Wizard.
local control.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. So the Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary is something I unequivocally support. We have the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary in my neck of the woods that extends into San Luis Obispo County. And why it's good enough for us but not good enough for you, I don't understand. We have a thriving harbor area in just off the coast of Monterey. We have cruise ships that come in. I'm not a big fan of the pollution they cause, but if a national marine sanctuary can permit a cruise ship to come in, I'm not sure how that would affect other commercial operations for a national marine sanctuary here in San Luis Obispo County. And so I have never voted no or to abstain on difficult decisions like whether or not I should have my city support the Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary. And I believe that if we're going to be serious about climate issues, we have to act seriously. And that means making decisions that sometimes are difficult. And that means when we talk about how do we protect and support our diverse ecological and sensitive environmental areas, we can't hedge or equivocate. We have to be clear-minded and act decisively about creating the protections we need to save ourselves as a species. Because we all took our science classes in high school and know that if we kill off the fish, we are not much further down that chain. And we need to ensure that we're creating, much like our indigenous neighbors have done for many generations, creating policies and making decisions that affect not just us or our kids, but 7 generations down the road are sustainable and long-term decisions.
Thank you. Ms. Addis.
Well, I absolutely support the Chumash Marine Sanctuary. And I was endorsed by Sierra Club when I ran in 2020, and that was the position I have now. It continues to be. I'm elated to see the sanctuary move forward. I'm also on the Morro Bay City Council, where we are working on wind power energy generation and battery energy storage as we address the climate crisis. In addition to saying I support the sanctuary, I've personally written letters, advocated as founder of Women's March San Luis Obispo, and supported the San Luis Obispo Progressives when they were one of the very first political party groups to come out in support of the Chumash Sanctuary. And I want to say that I'm incredibly excited that the Northern Chumash, who put so much work into this effort, have reported that over 99% of the latest comments, over 30,000 comments that were received, over 99% were in favor of the Chumash Sanctuary. So someone who serves on the Morro Bay City Council, the opportunity to be located on the shores of a sanctuary while moving forward some of the largest climate action projects in our nation is historic, and it's exciting. And I want to thank the late Fred Collins, as well as the Northern Chumash, and many others who have worked on this project. We're almost there, and it is time to keep going.
Thank you. Ms. Carter.
Thank you. I, too, also support the Chumash Sanctuary, and I live in Monterey, not far from John, and we have a thriving sanctuary up in our area. And I was actually just at Whale Fest this weekend in Monterey, and they were showing a map of all of the sanctuaries along the coast. And what I will also add is that I had family that was in Maui for several years, and they have a sanctuary out there, and they have a thriving community, and they've done some really innovative things, and they're now releasing whales from fishing gear. They've put oysters in the harbor to clean it, and all kinds of things that we could bring here as well. And I think being able to have a thriving ecosystem, supporting our apex predators, supporting the thriving whales that come through our areas, and making sure that we have protected areas is really important. And we also have cruise ships. They have cruise ships in Maui, and I think that this only is positive, and having wind power is important to reaching our climate goals, and so is solar. And I think all around it's a very great thing for this community. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Drake.
I would say I do agree with it. I am in favor of it, and it's because I think in order to be green, in order to have a sustainable society, we have to get uncomfortable sometimes. That's the only way to survive. The best way that humans have moved forward throughout society and throughout life is that we make ourselves uncomfortable, we try new things, and we do what's best for ourselves, for our survival. And so that's why I'm in support of it. Yeah, that's very straightforward.
Thank you. Our second question comes from our combined audience tonight, and that question is this. How do you plan to address the water problem in California? For example, river water reclamation, storage, and dams. Mr. Wizard.
Thank you again, Mr. Mayor. This one is near and dear to me. On the Monterey Peninsula, we have the Monterey One Water jurisdiction with Pure Water Monterey, which is advanced treated water. It's 3,500 acre feet, or about 3,500 Olympic swimming pools of reclaimed drinking water that supports our community. We're expanding that another 2,250 acre feet to have nearly 6,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools of fresh water available to our community year after year after year. That project is in its infancy here with Central Coast Blue in Pismo Beach, Arroyo Grande, Grover Beach. But to answer the question specifically, what we need to be doing immediately is capping all of the ocean outfalls. In Oceano, Pismo Beach and Oceano push out 1.5 million gallons a day of water into the Pacific Ocean. That's roughly 1,300 acre feet per year, or more water than the city of Grover Beach consumes in an entire year, that we just push out into the Pacific and pay money to NOAA for the discharge permit, pay money to the federal government for the permission to discharge that water into the ocean. Why do we do that? We know that water is precious. We know that we need every drop we can get, and we let 1.5 million gallons a day get flushed out into the ocean and pay for the privilege of wasting it. The state of California has a $60 billion surplus just this year, 70 last year, and even if it's only half as much next year, that's $160 billion of free money we didn't know we would have. And we need to cap those ocean outfalls. We need to divert that water to treatment plants. We need to clean it. We need to inject it into the ground and then withdraw it for, was that the end? Withdraw it so that we can use it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Ms. Addis.
So much to say about water. I mean, the very short answer is we need to produce water. And we can do that. What we chose to do in Morro Bay and what I campaigned on and have moved forward has been water reclamation. It's not the only it's not the only way to increase water, but it is one that occurs here on the Central Coast. The benefits of moving that project forward, and I'm not saying it came without controversy, but it came with a lot of benefits. One of those is long-term water security for our city, thinking, not just 10 years, 20 years, 30 years into the future, but thinking 50 and 100 years into the future so that our city would be secure. And not just for drinking water, also for agriculture and for our fire needs. I would say that a couple of the benefits are recharging the aquifer, making sure that we flush out some of the nitrates that have been in the underground water, and creation of jobs. And so when we think about water and we think about creating more water in California, it's also a huge job producer because these are construction jobs and we need union labor on those jobs. So to me, it uplifts the middle class while also creating a benefit of long-term water security for our communities.
Thank you. Ms. Carter.
We have a great opportunity with Monterey One Water up where we are, but it has not been proven yet. And my concern about Monterey One Water is that we're only dependent on as much water as we use. So the more we conserve, the less water we have to recycle and reclaim. And I am a fan of water supply. So we need all options on the table, not limited to desal, reclaimed water, anything else that we can get our hands on to make sure we address our housing crisis and build livable conditions for people to be. And I would also say that what goes along with our housing crisis, particularly in this district, is that we need to work together better and make sure that people have a place to live. So when we address our water problems, we come up with creative solutions and more than one option for water supply, then we can start building. And I think that's critical.
Thank you. Mr. Drake.
I have never been one to shy away from controversy when it comes to how we extract energy and how we get or how we replenish our water supply. And I've been a huge advocate for for ocean desalination along the coast of California, just because I think that if we're going to remain sustainable within water, we're going to need to be able to literally get it from the source, clean it up, ship it out to our communities. We have deserts that in the state of California that also need water. And so I think by just looking at just a purely district-like stance, that's not going to solve the issue of California. As representatives in the state assembly, we're not just looking out for this district, but for the whole of the state. And so my whole take on this issue on how do we get more water is desalination, because that's the most effective way that we can come up with in terms of large amounts of water creation. And it comes with a lot of jobs. It comes with new job creations, which is a huge positive. It'll save us money in the long term. It will save us billions of dollars in the long term. And with that, we can even go a step further into having sustainable desalination through nuclear power. Nuclear power is also a great money source, and it's also sustainable.
Thank you. Ms. Norden.
Yes. Water is like the new oil. And if there's one thing I see is we have a lot of water boards throughout our districts and throughout the state of California. And somehow we can't build homes because there's always a water issue. And even as was shared in our area right now, they want to build more homes and there's the restriction on water. And then there's the restriction for the consumers to consume the water. And when you do, then they raise your water rates because you consumed it and you didn't use enough. It sort of sounds like a little vicious circle. We need desal. I totally agree with you. And not only do we need desal, we also need more storage, water storage throughout the state of California. We need to go back and look at that infrastructure and see how we can build better for the future, because we need to think about our children and our children's children and the generations to come, and we can't just keep squeezing the water and saying, well, we can't do this and we can't do that. I agree with John. We need to capture that water that's going out into the ocean. It's just wasteful. But then again, we have the ecological and the environmental issues that surround it, and that becomes a whole nother issue. But we do need more water storage. We recognize that we do, and we need to do something about it and actually stop talking about it. Thank you.
Thank you for keeping your phones on mute. It helps the candidates, helps us. Our next question delves with California healthcare. Our first question comes from Indivisible San Luis Obispo. After having read the text of Assembly Bill 1400, Guaranteed Healthcare for All, what questions or concerns do you have about this legislation? Ms. Addis.
Well, thank you, Indivisible. I want to start by saying I'm honored to have the endorsement of the California Nurses Association, which is one of the main organizations who put their leadership and their dedication into AB 1400. My support for universal health care comes from my personal experience in two different ways. First, I had a student immigrate here with grave healthcare needs, and his family came here because they couldn't get what they needed in their home country. And I was very happy to see that he was able to get the care he needed until he passed away when he was in my 8th grade class. But about 3 years later, I got a phone call from his family, and they said, Maestra, will you please help us? The father had gone to get chemo, and he was turned away at his appointment because he did not have health insurance. And I will never forget the terror that it caused that family when he couldn't get what he needed. So I have two main questions, and this has to do with being committed to the issue. The first is, who do I need to convince? And the second is, what do I need to ensure that not one more person is turned away from care? So I'm working with local leaders, I'm engaged with CNA, and I'm ready on day one to start working on this when I get to the State Assembly.
Ms. Carter.
I have many concerns about AB 1400, the first being the funding and where are we going to get the money to pay for it. The second part is, how are we going to solve our provider crisis? We have a provider crisis in our communities, and that goes back to housing and water and everything else, and we need to solve that problem first. I cannot support AB 1400 as it stands. There's not the support in Sacramento for it. It didn't even come up to the Assembly floor for a vote. I think we need to work on equity in healthcare, we need to work on access, and we need to work on how we can make this a little bit easier for everybody else. There's no doubt that healthcare costs are soaring, they're expensive, but I think that we need to work towards a solution that's not one or the other. We need to bring stakeholders to the table and work together, because a bill of $500 billion is not going to work. Thank you.
Mr. Drake.
So I actually don't have a concern with AB 1400 at all. I heavily supported the bill, and I still support the bill. My question is, why in the world is a bill that we have been pushing for in California for almost 5 decades, why was it instantly shelved the minute it was brought before this state assembly? When is it that in California, of all places, do our votes not matter? My biggest concern is that we have politicians actively going to Sacramento, campaigning on issues that they're not fulfilling. And that's one reason why I decided to run, because I'm sick and tired of it. And I think so many other people are sick and tired of just hearing the talk behind, we'll give you healthcare, we'll give you housing, we'll give you education, and then instantly just shelving a bill anytime that comes up, because it's an easier issue to campaign on than it is to solve. So while I'm in favor of AB 1400, I am deeply in favor of the politicians who campaigned on it and then shelved it instantly without debate, and of the progressives in there as well, who decided not to even challenge the push for AB 1400. Oh, why aren't you fulfilling this promise that you've campaigned on? That was a joke. That's why I'm running, and that's one reason why I support AB 1400. I'm not concerned with it. I have no concerns with it, but I'm passionate about seeing things get done and seeing my generation thrive.
Ms. Norton.
AB 1400 is a bad bill. And I will say that it was Governor Newsom who campaigned on that and stepped away from it when it came up. But there's more to that story, which I hope I'll be able to tell you. AB 1400, single payer, is a bad bill. It would eliminate private health care altogether. I don't know if you're all ready to give that up. And it would create the largest tax hike in history. I'm going to break the bill down. It's not free health care, it's just government run. Employers, employees, and businesses will pay for it, and so you can expect tax increases. The passing of the single-payer health care bill would create the largest program in state history. My concern, the cost, the administration, and overall the monopoly. The cost would be in billions. The administration would be government. Oh, that would be really fun. How about the DMV and the EDD? How did that work out for everybody? There's no framework in place. There's no blueprint. Just pass the bill and we'll plan later. We'll find funding later. And then there's the monopoly. I understand the Nurses Association, the unions, was driving force behind the bill, so watch who they give their campaign money to. The bill never made it to the assembly floor because the author knew it was a bad bill. And let me just add here, it's an election year. And what happens in an election year, they pull the bill, but they'll be back. And he couldn't gain the votes to pass it, so he withdrew it. The bill was so bad, the Democratic Party threatened to pull the endorsements from those who voted against it. So much for freedom of representation for the people. Thank you.
Mr. Wizard.
Thank you, Mr. Cabrera. I have a personal connection to this issue because my parents are a little bit older and they are in declining health. For us, that's a problem because my parents have Kaiser Health Insurance and there is no Kaiser in Monterey. And so my older dad, who is driving less and less, and my older mom, who hasn't driven in years, can't get to the hospital very often to get the care they need. And so when I think about healthcare in California and the needs for reforms, I am convinced we have universal access. You can go to any hospital you want. But whether your insurance works there is a different question. Whether you take on 6 figures of medical bills or 6 figures of medical debt when you go visit any hospital you want to is a different question than can you go to the hospital? And for some people, the answer is no to both. But for those who can get to the hospital, having health insurance that works no matter what hospital you go to is the most important question that immediately follows. And so having universal health care, universal single payer, is important to me so that nobody has to choose between, do I wait until I have an infection and I'm in the ICU versus I was able to go to the doctor early and get medication or treatment to prevent that ICU stay. So AB 1400 for me is an important bill, and my question would be to individual legislators as their colleague, how do I get you to a yes? How do I get this bill off the floor and approved? Thank you.
Our next question from the audience on healthcare. If California takes over healthcare, will wait times be long, and will people be able to still choose their doctor? Ms. Addis.
Well, I think people will be able to choose their doctor still. I don't think that wait times need to be any longer. And as we move forward in this conversation, there's not anybody out there that wants to give up choice and have a worse system. What we're really talking about when we talk about improving healthcare is making sure everybody can go to the doctor without fear, making sure nobody shows up and gets turned away simply because they can't pay. And there is quite a bit of fear-mongering out there. There's going to be a lot of stories told about why it can't work. We know it can work. We know it works in other countries. We know that Americans, of all the places on earth, I would say our nation is probably the greatest nation on earth, and there's incredible ingenuity here. We can get a bill passed, we can get health care for everyone, and we can make sure that it's high-quality health care. And I have confidence in all of us and the participation of all of us to get that done.
Ms. Carter.
I would say without a doubt, waits will be longer. Without a doubt, we won't have as much choice, and we still will have a provider issue. And I think that when you talk about AB 1400, that's the rub, right? We want our choice. We want to be able to have doctors and not have as long of wait times. I've lived in London, I've lived in Barcelona. The systems are not perfect. And we talk about places like Norway, and their entire population is 7 million people, which is less than the city of San Francisco. So when we talk about this in other countries, we need to be aware of what's happening in our country and what's happening in California. And my concern is making sure that everybody has access to care. And in part of being in a rural district, that's a problem. We need to make sure that there is access. We need to make sure people can get the care they need. And we need to make sure it's equitable. And so I'm not convinced that AB 1400 will make it more equitable and we're going to wave a magic wand and say, oh, here, this is going to make everything better. It's not that simple. So that's what I believe.
Mr. Drake,
We currently spend more on healthcare subsidies than if we were to just have universal healthcare outright. My mother recently ended up in the hospital because of something that happened to her. I'm not going to go into it just because private stuff. But because she was afraid of the crippling debt that would come out of it, she did not call for an ambulance, and she was scared to death to get a surgery that she needed because she didn't know if it would bankrupt her and my father. They're living on retirement. And that's the thing I'm scared of, not just for myself, but for the millions of people across California, because they are dying, they are living in fear, and they're not able to live comfortably in knowing that the minute they go to the hospital, they're going to be riddled with debt. Some people I've talked to who have been through the healthcare system say that they would have rather had died than have taken the amount of debt that they're living through. It's absolutely horrible, and we need a system that works for us, and our system doesn't work for us. And the reason why it doesn't work for us is because it's been commodified by the pharmaceutical industries. It's been commodified by the insurance companies. They see our lives as profit, and our lives are not for profit. And that's the thing I'm scared of. I'm scared that we're not going to move past that point because we're too concerned about, oh, will I have longer wait times? People are dying. People are dying. That's what I have to say.
Ms. Norden.
Well, we live in interesting times. As an example, I just want to say, and maybe even a beware sign, Vermont, the state of Vermont tried single-payer healthcare. Are you aware of that? And after it passed and they tried it, they abandoned it because of all of the expenses and the cost and the wait times and the things that were associated with it. And so this AB 1400 has been brought before the legislature 5 different times. And each time it didn't move. I think we need to look at AB 1400 and what's wrong with it? Why is it not moving forward? Why isn't it happening? And I'd also like to address the fact that, we do have Medi-Cal in the state of California. And in regards to that, while AB 1400 was not passing, the governor's office was making a contract with Kaiser Permanente. Not only is Kaiser Permanente a healthcare provider, but it is also a healthcare insurer. So we are headed towards a single payer in the contractual agreement that the governor was making while we were looking at AB 1400. So there are many things to consider. If you haven't read the bill, just go and read the bill yourself. And the man did pull it because he realized he did not have the support. So I do not support it.
Mr. Wizard.
Thank you. I guess I need to invest in a better Magic 8-Ball because I don't know whether this bill will increase wait times or decrease them. And I don't know what this bill that is different than the bill in Vermont will or won't do with regard to access to care. It is plain to see that healthcare in this state is not working to serve the most of us. Healthcare costs are out of control. That medical debt exists is anathema to the idea that healthcare should be available to everyone. You should not have to mortgage your life to stay alive. That's backwards. Healthcare should be readily accessible and available. I don't know what caused this bill to get pulled from the floor, but I do know that if we continue with the status quo, we will never make any progress. And so the first time they talked about whether women should be able to vote, the first time they said, should people who are like me count as a full person or 3/5 of one? those conversations were not the last time they ever had that. And in order to advance and improve and grow as a society, we have to ask tough questions and push ourselves toward a more prosperous and brighter future. And that means that we cannot do what we are doing today for the rest of time.
My apologies, Miss Addis. We called you out of turn, and you never blinked. You saved me. My appreciation. So let's get back on track, Mr. Drake. We'll answer the first question.
Our next topic has to do with the homeless in California. Our first question comes from Paso Cares. From Paso Cares, Governor Newsom has proposed a bill to provide mental health services, residential treatment centers, and job placement centers to help our California homeless become productive members of our community. How do you plan to tackle homelessness if elected? Mr. Drake.
So it is my opinion, because I work in housing policy, that the only issue in California isn't that there isn't enough programs for unhoused people. The issue is that there simply isn't housing. And of the housing that exists, it is commodified. So it's becoming more and more expensive. So 70 new programs have been created under the Newsom administration, yet homelessness went up 17% because the underlying issue is that there isn't housing. 600,000 jobs were created in the state of California since 2010, but only around 200,000 new homes were built. And of that, 90% were single family units and 95% were luxury real estate, meaning second homes, third homes. We're getting to the point where commodification has become so bad that you have $100 million homes on the market that even the ultra wealthy in California can't even afford. At this point, while yes, programs are great, we have to start addressing the real issue and stop with all these smokes and mirrors. Another unhoused people program is not going to solve the issue. I have people on my campaign team who are homeless, not because they're unskilled, not because they suffer from mental health or drug addiction. They simply lost their job. One of them, LaQuinta Reynolds, has 2 masters and a PhD. It's not like she doesn't know what she's doing. It's just that she can't find something to help her out because everything that she wants to buy is too expensive.
Thank you. Ms. Norton.
Thank you. In 90 seconds, it's really going to be hard to solve homelessness, but I'll do my best. I'll begin to say that there are many new bills that are being introduced in the legislature to help the homeless get the care they need to live a healthy life, and I will be supporting them, and I will be supporting this governor's bill as we move forward. I want to thank you, Paso Cares, for the question, and I saw on your website that you need a warming center, so I have some good news for you. There's an assembly bill being introduced right now, if you want to write it down. It's AB 2591, that protects places of worship that provide temporary shelter and other services to the homeless and expand shelter opportunities. So you might want to take a look at that. I support the governor's plan to provide mental health and substance disorder services and residential treatment centers to help people get the help and care they need. I fully support it. Housing First has not addressed the mental health root issues of being homeless on the streets and living in encampments. Now, as John was saying, there's a whole definition of homelessness in many different facets, but this particular bill that you asked about had to do with the mental health, so I'm just going to press into that. It's a little more complicated defining homelessness than you think. People are homeless because of different reasons, and the care court the governor is proposing is taking us to a new level of help, hope, and care, and I appreciate it. Care court will focus on people with schizophrenia spectrum and other psychotic disorders who lack mental health, mental decision-making capabilities. And I just want to stop there to say, I work with kids who are 5150. I understand what these holds are. I understand what this mental health issue is. And I work with kids with drug addiction.
Thank you, Mr. Wizard.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The word home is in homelessness, and so that is the root of the problem, is there are not enough homes. We know that there's significant overcrowding in our communities. We know that homes are unaffordable to a lot of people. So when we talk about how we get out of this rut of a lack of homes, it's by creating more homes. Now, the other side of that, though, is when someone is homeless, you can't necessarily, not always, can you say, here's a home, go live there, and you'll be great. Some people need services and programs to support them as they make that transition off the street or out of congregate shelter. And so it's called housing first, but it's not called housing only. Housing first means give people homes and then provide the services that help them stay housed and help them grow into a fully active and participating member of society. The governor's bill specifically talks about people who are unable to care for themselves. So as a former police officer who took people into protective custody under Section 5150 of the Welfare and Institutions Code, someone who transported people to the hospital for medical care, only to have a doctor say, I don't want to keep this person, you have to let them go. Well, what is it that I'm supposed to do as a police officer when a medical doctor says this person doesn't need medical attention? So we need to change the way that we approach this problem in California. And whether the governor's proposal is the best way to do that, I don't know, but I do know that the way we do it now isn't working and change is desperately needed.
Thank you, Ms. Addis.
Thank you. So I was raised by a single mom, and the reason for that is that my father struggled with homelessness, with addiction, with mental health illness, and with incarceration. And I know firsthand that homelessness doesn't just affect the person who is unhoused, it also affects the people from whose houses they are missing. This is a community issue and it's a family issue. It's not just about the person who needs housing. And I do believe the way to solve homelessness is to provide housing. At its base, it's that simple. But it proves very complicated because you really need four things. You need money, you need land, you need the right zoning, but most importantly, you have to have political will. And so as a council member, I've done just that. I campaigned on housing. We approved housing as a major city goal twice. We approved the very first 100% low-income housing development in our city in 30 years, in 3 decades. And that took political will. So if I make it to the assembly, that's the kind of leadership, that's the kind of get-it-done attitude that I would take, is that we need all of those 4 elements, and I would work on each of those to make sure that every Californian is housed.
Thank you. Ms. Carter.
Thank you for this question. I would say that providing mental health services to our homeless population is a critical piece of the puzzle to making sure they can get a leg back up in society. I've said over and over and over again on this campaign that we need to work towards having more mental health facilities. And I've had conversations with people on this campaign that there are not enough beds. There are not enough places to hold people. There are not enough places for them to get the resources. So that goes back to our provider problem. And it's all connected. We need to build more housing, yes. We need to look at water solutions so we can build more housing. I know that Atascadero and Paso are able to build more housing, but they need more jobs. So it's all connected. How can we get people jobs? How can we get them dignified housing? How do we get them mental health services? How do we get to people who might not want to be living in houses and want to live unsheltered? Because there are those people too. And how do we support our first responders who are working with these people on a daily basis and get call after call after call and are on the front lines of the mental health crisis with our homeless population? I think those are all things we need to talk about, and I'm committed to working towards making sure we have creative solutions for more mental health facilities in our communities, and we can get more providers and build more housing and have creative water solutions as well. Thank you.
Thank you for those answers. Our second question in this topic comes from our audience both here and online, and here is the question. Part of Governor Newsom's proposal is to create care courts that will mandate services. How should the state respond to individuals refusing assistance? Ms. Norton.
Well, that's a really good question. That's an excellent question. As a matter of fact, when I looked at his care courts and I've looked at his California, just dealing with situations that have to do this with this homeless crisis, I believe that what needs to be done, I did talk to a district attorney regarding that, but I think what needs to be done is there needs to be this collaborative effort. And I see the governor right now advocating going out amongst the communities and really talking to people about the situations and how there can be change. Going to the legislature, I am going to work with the governor on this issue. This is very important. I have worked with mental health, and I've worked with young kids. I've worked on the street. I've been to the back roads of all the homeless situations with the police. I've been to the warming centers. I've been to 40 Prado. I've been to these places because I'm really looking for solutions to make a difference. So with that, the DAs are very concerned about how they're going to be able to actually handle all this as well. So I don't have an answer specifically for that, but I am looking for an answer, and I am doing the research, and I hope to talk to the governor myself. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Wizard.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The governor's proposal is uncharted territory for some of us. The idea that we would compel someone, that we would force someone to enter treatment is uncomfortable for a lot of people. And that's fair because our society is built on the idea of liberty and personal autonomy and free agency. However, when someone is not in their right mind, when someone has experienced a psychotic break, when someone is experiencing a different reality than the rest of us, they're not necessarily able to make decisions that are for their best interest. And so we have to have a difficult conversation around if someone can't care for themselves and they don't have family to rely on or have somebody who can help coach them into getting treatment and getting better, who does that responsibility fall to? So I think it's appropriate that at the end of that road, that the state is able to get people the help they need so that they don't get any help at all. But it's not enough to get people help up front, because once they do get that help, once they do have their brain chemicals rebalanced and are able to grasp the same reality that you and I live in, where do they go? And so that's why, as a member of the Seaside City Council, I've said yes to 1,600 homes in the last 4 years. 20% of them have been affordable. I used all of my political capital as a new council member to get the first shelter for women and children built in the city of Seaside for the entire Monterey Peninsula. These things are difficult but
Ms.
necessary.
Addis.
This is a really good question, and I would say I've definitely dealt with this as a special education teacher. I taught special education for over a decade and worked with students who had emotional disabilities, and many of their families suffered from mental illness as well. And what we found to be the most successful was a person-centered approach. So rather than talking about them, talking about us and having the people who are most affected involved as we start to make these decisions. And I know right now we're talking about people who are at the point of refusing services, but I would say we need much more funding, much more education, and much more effort put in on the prevention side of things so that we don't have as many people that we feel like may need to be forced into services. And the other thing I would say is that we have to keep thinking about those wraparound supports. There are many levels of service and support that we can provide to our community members, our family members, our neighbors who are experiencing mental health issues. And we have to do more on the prevention side and the wraparound service side of things so that we don't end up in a situation where we're shoving too many people into services. And we've gone very wrong in the past when we have done that, and we need to be incredibly careful about that.
Thank you. Ms. Carter.
I think that this is going to take an all hands on deck approach, and we need to work together with everybody and be collaborative on helping people get the services they need. If people are going to refuse care, we need to look at alternatives, what level of services they might need, how we can work with them and their families to try to make inroads. And for these homeless individuals and the ones experiencing mental health breaks, I think we need to be working towards more services, and we need to be working towards talking more about our mental health crisis and having more providers so that we understand exactly what's going on and how we can help these people. And wraparound services, as Don mentioned, are really important as well.
Thank you. Mr. Drake.
So I have family that has suffered from homelessness, from mental health and drug abuse. And the one thing I can say is that forcing care upon someone is not going to make it better, and doping them up with drugs is not going to solve the issue. I mean, like, I'm about to get graphic for a second, but I work at a store, and there was this guy who was gang raped when he was homeless, and he comes in and he talks to himself. He had a psychotic break. He has PTSD, and he keeps talking to himself, and he freaks out if you get close to him. Grabbing him forcibly, or even trying to coerce him into a small space and then trying to give him drugs is not going to help his issue. In fact, it will exacerbate it more, and it'll make it harder for him to even reintegrate. He does take medication, but sometimes he forgets, and you can tell when he forgets. But it will be the whole idea of forcing services onto him, and rather than having those services exist for his benefit, that will make the system a lot worse, and it will definitely be a challenge of whether or not this person, even though they may not be quite in their right mind, even truly has certain rights to I guess, go about in getting services. That becomes a question of whether or not we truly prioritize the individual or the comfortableness of a society.
The final topic of the evening, women's rights. The question comes from Women's March San Luis Obispo. What action have you taken to support access to reproductive care? Mr. Wizard.
Thank you for your question. I have the benefit of having a Planned Parenthood clinic in my city. And as a council member in a city with a Planned Parenthood clinic, as someone who has obtained services from that Planned Parenthood clinic myself when I was a younger person with less means and less access to healthcare, I am deeply supportive of the work that our lower income and federally qualified health centers provide in our communities, that invaluable resource that people have in order to get the care they need. So whether that is ensuring that there are monitors to protect people trying to access care, whether that is refusing to agendize a council item to revoke their business license. Reproductive rights are healthcare. It's that simple. If you don't have access to it, you will find a way to do it anyway. And to penalize people and criminalize people for seeking the care they need is wrong and immoral.
Ms. Addis.
Thank you. Reproductive care is under attack in our nation. 26 states are set to lose access to abortion care. So this is an incredibly serious issue. I'm endorsed by pro-choice groups such as the Monterey Democratic Women, the Santa Cruz Democratic Women, the Women's Political Committee, California Women's List, Fund Her, and the National Women's Political Committee. And that's because I walk the walk. I've championed and gotten majority support on my mixed council to pass a resolution supporting Roe. I've organized and emceed rallies like Stop the Bans. I've participated in Congressman Carvajal's roundtable. He is also an endorser, his roundtable on reproductive care. And I volunteer my time as a Planned Parenthood Action Fund board member. So I really believe it's up to us to lead the way. And in California, we have an opportunity not just to protect Californians and Californians' access to care, but to be a leader across this nation. And we need state legislators who are going to do that. And if elected, I'm ready to bring that kind of perspective to the state legislature.
Ms. Carter.
I think the repealing of Roe v. Wade, which is frighteningly close, is the issue of our time right now. And as a young woman who has used Planned Parenthood clinics and had a family who raised multi-millions of dollars for Planned Parenthood, I'm fully in support of reproductive rights and a woman's right to choose. And that is something that cannot be changed or revoked, and I'm committed to being a champion for that cause in the state assembly. I think we need to talk about access. We need to talk about what's going on and why states and other places want to revoke our access. And I think that we need to have an all hands on deck approach to make sure this is something that stays in place. Thank you.
Mr. Drake.
So because I'm so young, I guess in an official capacity, I haven't really done much to push for the championing of women's reproductive rights. But I can definitely tell you what some of my goals are in that I want to actually create a constitutional amendment through explicit language in the state of California to protect a woman's right to choose, because the reason why it's so easy for the federal government right now and other state governments to actively attack women's rights, especially reproductive rights, is because there is no explicit language within state constitutions or the federal constitution to protect a woman's right to choose. If we in California can push for explicit language within our constitution to keep it and to protect it, then nothing the federal government can do or the state legislature, should it switch sides, can do to harm or impact a woman's right to choose. Thank you.
Ms. Norton.
I love a balance in government. I think people are a little confused about this issue today, actually. Recently, I saw a new text emoji, maybe some of you saw it, depicting a pregnant man. So even though you asked the question about women's reproductive rights, it may be a new consideration in society. What are they trying to communicate? If women don't want their children, do men? I'm not sure what they're trying to communicate. We advocate for the environment that has no voice of its own, the whales and the butterfly, but when it comes to advocating for a child's life, who will be their voice? Across this platform tonight, the questions surrounded ethnicity, racial discrimination, saving the homeless, and we're all looking for advocacy, but when it comes to this last question, I have to go back to our founding documents. In the words of the Declaration of Independence, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among them are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I believe that all men are created equal.
The final
and they
question
are...
for tonight from our audience also refers to women's rights. What would you do to support working moms, many of them who are Latinas, who didn't get to stay home during COVID? Ms. Addis.
Thank you so much. What an important question, especially after these last 2 years. One of the biggest needs I saw as a teacher in San Luis Coastal Unified School District was the lack of access to childcare, the lack of access to being able to send children to school. I was part of the team that wrote the plans to move into distance learning, and then part of the team who wrote the plans to bring children back to school. And one of the biggest things that we struggled with was, what are people going to do with their kids when they have to go to work? How is transportation going to be provided? So on the Morro Bay City Council, I volunteered to be the child care liaison to the We Are the Care initiative that is working on expanding child care across San Luis Obispo County. There's initiatives in other counties with other chambers called Child Care is Good for Business. And we really have to remember that when we support working moms and working families,
Ms.
we're supporting
Carter.
our entire community.
Thank you so much for this question. I think that what we have learned through the pandemic is that childcare is critical and supporting our working families is critical. And how we do that is we make more resources available. The Chamber of Commerce in Monterey is working on a project to do just that, and working with First Five, which I think is an incredible resource for us. And supporting working moms is something that we have to do moving forward. And the pandemic has showed us very explicitly what it looks like when we can't support working families. And now people are struggling to get back to work because they can't find childcare because there aren't enough providers. So many of these issues go back to providers and how we can increase access, how we can increase equitable access, how we can increase providers. And again, it's going to take all hands on deck, working with schools, working with parents, and working with business, because they have a stake in this too. And I think we all need to work together to make this happen.
Mr. Drake.
So I'm going to apologize because my ADHD got the best of me. What is the question?
What would you do to support working moms, many of them who are Latinas, who did not get to stay home during COVID?
Great. Yes. No, I do support universal child care, preschools, pre-Ks, all universal educational opportunities, because that is vital. If we're going to say the youth is our future, we might as well treat them with the utmost respect that we possibly can. I would also say that I think what we can ultimately do is give them an ear, actively listen to what it is our marginalized communities want, and actively attend to their needs, because we can keep saying we want universal health care or we want universal child care, but unless that is what they truly want, I think those are just empty words that we can just put in their mouth. So again, universal child care, that's awesome, but I can't really explicitly say too much on the issue because I'm not educated enough in that department. I'm sorry.
Ms. Norton.
Thank you. I am a little more educated being grandma and mom, so I'll go for it. But during the pandemic, which none of us really saw coming, it impacted families in just so many different ways. And it impacted my personal family because my daughter-in-law had to quit her job and stay home. And it was the first year of kindergarten for my grandson. In front of the Zoom was not working, and Dawn probably is smiling down there. And so she had to quit her job and stay home. And I had the other little one. I did some preschool at my house. And so we do need help. But during the pandemic, so many things were shut down. So people really didn't have the resources or the access to the resources because the schools weren't open. And so the extra aftercare school, we need to make a difference for the future. And we do need to have more opportunity to help with the children. But that is going to take more care centers and things like that. So that will be part of that solution.
Mr. Wizard.
Thank you very much. So during the pandemic, I had the great privilege of having an 11-year-old stepson and a 16-year-old stepson who I got to care for and be their teacher and their PE coach and their tutor and their mental health counselor. And it was challenging. And I had the privilege of that experience because I got to work from home. And to the question posed to us, there are many people who didn't have that privilege. And to support those families that didn't have that privilege, we need to be doing more to create the opportunities that I was provided and others weren't. So things like reimbursement agreements for school districts to fund school bus transportation when parents have to work and can't get their kids to school. Instead of telling the parents you can't work, why are we making families pay for bus rides for their kids to get to school? Increasing the number of students who can participate in after-school care, increasing funding to child care and after-school care providers, increasing funding to daycare providers, because all of that costs money and it's either coming out of the state's pocket or yours.
And FYI, please join the League as we hold a webinar on the unhoused March 2nd at noon. Register for the webinar on our website, March 28th. I'm corrected, March 28th. Before our final comments, I want to thank our tech team for doing a very difficult job making it look so easy. Of course, we want to thank our candidates for your obvious preparation, for your clarity, for your forthrightness, and above all, your civil discourse. And there's two jobs that adults never get training for, probably the two most important jobs that you play, and that is being a parent and also being a citizen. So we salute you for your civic engagement and doing your homework. And most of all, thank you, John. John, for your hard work, for your organization. Some final words from the Reverend Stephen Vines.
All right, I am so excited about the candidates we have here. And first of all, I'd like to thank everyone for coming here tonight, because with the NAACP, the oldest, roughest, toughest civil rights organization in the United States of America, civil engagement is everything. Because without civil engagement, how can we have a democracy? Because a democracy has to be informed. And without having the opportunity to get out there in the community and to see what's happening, you can't use the news, because you never know what's coming on the news and this, that, and the other. So I'd like to thank all the students. I'd like to thank the candidates. I'd like to thank all the organizations that worked with us, and I'd like to thank the community because the bottom line is this. This is our community, and it's up to us to get it right. And if we're not involved, somebody else is going to get it wrong for us. Thank you.
The candidates will make themselves available for any questions you might have person to person. But other than that, safe travels. Good night.